George, what are your thoughts on MMT? I think they get a few things right. I think that their description is somewhat correct. I would dispute that it's not completely correct. I don't know that the government spends money into existence. I think the MMT crew have a hard time explaining the TGA. And I think they also have a hard time explaining the Eurodollar system, because their whole thing is that the U.S. government is the issuer of the currency. It's a currency issuer, not a currency user or a currency taker. And I don't know how you reconcile the Eurodollar system with that idea. Nor do I know how you reconcile the TGA. I think the MMTers that I've talked to that understand the TGA just say, oh, well, that's just there for show. Okay, I guess. And another thing I don't think they can understand, or that they can explain, is how the repo market would function, how the dollar funding markets would function without sovereign debt. That I don't think they've crossed that bridge. But there's a lot of things that I think where their description of the system is correct. And I think they understand that the commercial banking system is responsible for creating and destroying the majority of the money supply, or at least it was prior to 2008. And so they get that. Where I really disagree with them, though, are their policy prescriptions. And I understand that a lot of them aren't giving prescriptions, but the ones that do, I don't like those, because they just see excess capacity in the economy and assume that you can fill that excess capacity with government spending, and it's just magically we're going to be at full unemployment and we're all going to live in this utopia until we get inflation, and then all you have to do is just increase taxes, and then that sucks liquidity out of the system, and bam, your inflation problem is solved. I don't think, unfortunately, it don't work that way. And I would encourage the MMTers that have that policy prescription just to look at tax receipts as a percentage of GDP. And you see that you can increase taxes to 80, 90%. Doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to pay them. So if you look at the tax receipts compared to GDP, going back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, I mean, we had rates as high as 90%, all the way down to maybe 25% in the Reagan era. And if you look at the amount of money that we collect relative to GDP, it's pretty much the exact same. So you're going to have a real tough time pulling in inflation exclusively through taxes. And then I think you're really going to have a hard time creating additional goods and services through government spending. Because see, when they say that there's excess capacity in the economy, that therefore you can print money and not create inflation, they would readily admit that if you do create more currency units, then you're creating goods and services, that you are going to see consumer price inflation. They just argue that the government can create these jobs and create the amount of goods and services required to keep up with the amount of money printing. And I would argue that that's not going to happen in real life. It's great in paper. It works in a textbook. But as a math equation, it works. But in the world of imperfect human beings, in an imperfect world, it's not going to work. I mean, how many of you think that the government could be in charge of producing the stuff at Walmart or Home Depot, and they could do that at a rate that would keep up with trillions and trillions of dollars of money printing? You know, I'm not gonna roll the dice on that, especially if the downside is you've got to jack taxes to 90%. I think about that. What if we go through? See, this is what they never consider, right? They assume that they go back to the Phillips curve, where they think that if you get unemployment down to a certain level, that you're going to have inflation, and that once unemployment gets higher, then the inflation goes down. It's the same Phillips curve nonsense that was debunked back in the 1970s. So, or said another way, that if you have higher economic output, then that's going to result in inflation. But you could have higher nominal output or higher nominal prices. That creates higher nominal GDP, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the economy is richer. So, what would have happened in the 1970s when we had probably negative real GDP, yet we had inflation? What would have happened back then if you would have jacked tax rates from 30 or 40% up to 90? you would have completely crushed the economy, even worse. So there's just, again, I think they've got some good descriptions for sure, and they're very smart people. And I've got a lot of respect for Kelton and Mosler, but as far as their prescriptions or some of the MMTers prescriptions, I don't like those. I don't think that they're thinking through TGA. I don't think they're thinking through the Eurodollar system, and I don't think they're really comprehending how sovereign debt is used as collateral in the dollar funding markets, and what the lack of sovereign debt or the lack of pristine collateral, to use Jeff Snyder's words, would do to the entire global economy, meaning it would collapse it.